How do you think they did that?
Well, some of them, the granite in the Great Pyramid comes from more than 500 miles to the south. If you look at the famous King's Chamber, its walls and its roof.
There is a space inside the Great Pyramid at least 100 feet long, and no one on Earth has been inside it. It sits above the Grand Gallery, sealed in solid rock, with no door, no shaft, no crack to crawl through. 3 separate teams, using 3 different machines, all aimed cosmic particles at the stone, and all found the same emptiness in the same place. So why 9 years after they proved it exists, has nobody gotten in? Start with the size, because the size is what makes this hard to shrug off. When the Scan Pyramids team published in the journal Nature on November 2nd, 2017, they described a void with a minimum length of 30 meters. That is 100 feet of nothing, buried inside 6 million tons of limestone. And it is not a crack, and it is not a settling gap between blocks. The paper describes its cross-section as similar to the Grand Gallery, the huge corbelled passage that climbs toward the King's Chamber. The Grand Gallery runs 47 meters long and stands 8.6 meters tall. A person walks through it upright with room to spare. So picture that shape, sitting directly above the Grand Gallery, and picture it with no way in. And the Grand Gallery is worth a second here, because it is the strangest room in the building. Its walls step inward in overlapping courses as they rise, each layer hanging out over the one below, until the ceiling closes down to a narrow slot. Nobody agrees on what it was for. Some read it as a ramp system for hauling granite, some read it as storage for the plugging blocks that sealed the tomb. It is enormous, precise, and unexplained. Now the scans say there may be a second one of those sitting right on top of it. The Nature paper called it the first major inner structure found in the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. Not the first anomaly, not the first theory, but the first major inner structure in over 100 years inside the most measured building on the planet. Mehdi Tayyoubi, president of the Heritage Innovation Preservation Institute and one of the leaders of the project, told reporters the team could not say whether the big void was one structure or several structures in a row. What he was sure of was that it was there, that it was big, and that no existing theory of the pyramid had predicted it. That last part is the piece people skip past. Nobody was looking for it. Now, the obvious question is why nobody has simply gone and had a look. The answer is that the pyramid does not allow it. There is no corridor that leads there, no shaft that runs past it, no gap in the masonry within reach of it. Getting inside would mean cutting through solid stone that has held its own weight since the Old Kingdom. Egypt does not allow that, and no engineer would want to be the one holding the drill. The Great Pyramid is a weight-bearing mountain of stacked blocks that has been standing since the reign of Khufu, somewhere around 2600 BC. Every course above the void is carrying every course below it. Cutting a shaft in to satisfy our curiosity is the kind of choice you cannot take back if it goes wrong. The whole point of the Scan Pyramids mission was to look without touching, which means the big void is confirmed, mapped, and out of reach all at once. So how do you find a room you cannot reach, cannot see, and did not know to expect? You stop trying to look at the pyramid and you start counting what falls through it. Every second of every day, particles from deep space slam into the top of our atmosphere. That collision throws off a shower of smaller particles, and among them are muons. A muon is a heavy cousin of the electron, and its useful trick is that it barely notices matter. It punches through rock the way light punches through a window. Not all of them make it though, that is the whole method right there. Muons get partly soaked up by whatever they pass through, so a detector sitting under a pile of stone counts fewer of them than a detector sitting in the open. Dense stone eats muons. Empty air does not. Put a detector inside a pyramid, leave it there for months, and count. If one patch of sky is delivering more muons than the stone above it should allow, then something up there is missing. You do not get a photograph out of this. You get a density map, a kind of shadow picture of the inside of a mountain of rock, built one particle at a time. And that map is why nobody had to touch a single block to find the void. Here's the part that should have made this old news. The idea is not new. It is nearly 60 years old, and the first time somebody tried it, it failed flat. In 1967, the American physicist Luis Alvarez got permission to run the experiment inside the second pyramid at Giza, the one built for Khafre. Alvarez was not a fringe figure. He was one of the most decorated experimental physicists of his century. His team installed a muon detector in a chamber underneath the pyramid and started counting. They were hunting for hidden rooms. They found none. The data came back showing just what a solid pyramid should show, and the great cosmic ray experiment ended with a shrug. For decades, that result sat there like a closed door. The most famous physicist ever to point a machine at a pyramid had looked, and there was nothing to see. Except the detectors of 1967 were noisy, slow, and blunt, and the computing power behind them was a fraction of what a phone carries now. Alvarez was running the correct experiment on equipment that could not yet do the job. That is the detail nobody mentions when they talk about the Big Void. The technology that found it had already been written off once. And while the physics sat on the shelf, somebody else was trying to get inside the pyramid a completely different way. In 1872, an English engineer named Wayneman Dixon found two narrow openings in the walls of the Queen's Chamber, the room in the heart of the pyramid that nobody has ever really explained. The openings led into shafts running north and south. Dixon could see they went somewhere. He could not follow them, because they are roughly 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters, smaller than most air conditioning ducts. For over a century, those shafts just sat there, known and unreachable. Then, in 1993, a German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink built something small enough to go in. His robot was called Upuat, named for the Egyptian god who opens the ways, and it ran under the German Archaeological Institute in Cairo. On March 22, 1993, Upuat crawled up the southern shaft from the Queen's Chamber, roughly 63 meters into the body of the pyramid, and its camera stopped in front of something that had no business being there, a slab of limestone, sealing the shaft, finished, smooth, cut from better stone than the shaft around it, and set into the front of it, two copper fittings, corroded green, bent flat against the face, handles, or hinges, or pins for pulling something upright. Whatever they were, somebody had built a door 63 meters up a hole no human could ever crawl through, and then closed it. Gantenbrink tried the northern shaft a few days later and gave up partway. The bends in it were sharp enough that he was afraid the robot would jam and stay there forever. Years later, when someone finally did get up the northern shaft, they found the same thing waiting, a blocking slab, two shafts, two doors, and no way to open either one. They could have stopped there. They didn't. In September 2002, a National Geographic team drilled a small hole straight through the southern slab and pushed a camera in behind it. There was another block. 9 years after that, in 2011, a project called Jedi went back. Zahi Hawass set it up and named it after the magician Khufu is said to have asked when planning his own tomb. The robot came out of the University of Leeds, built by a team led by the engineer Rob Richardson, and it carried a bendable camera that could look around corners, which is the one thing nobody had managed before. Jedi got a look at the back of the blocking stone and at the reverse side of those copper pins. The pins did nothing mechanical at all. They passed through the thin slab and simply looped over on the other side. And on the floor in front of the door, there were red ochre marks, a thick painted line, and a set of symbols next to it, left by a hand that was working in there while the pyramid was still going up. One reading of those marks, published by the researcher Luca Miatello, reads them as numbers giving the length of the shaft in cubits. So a builder wrote a note in a space that was sealed for 4,500 years, and the note was still sitting there when the camera arrived. That is the pattern this whole story runs on. Every time somebody finally reaches into the Great Pyramid, they find another closed door behind the first one. By the time the physics got its second chance, the people holding it were not Egyptologists at all. The Scan Pyramids mission started in October 2015. It pulled together researchers from Nagoya University in Japan, the Heritage Innovation Preservation Institute in Paris, Cairo University, and the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission. Physicists and engineers, mostly, rather than diggers. Tayyubi told reporters ahead of the Nature release that the team was bringing a fresh and almost naive eye to the monuments, which is a polite way of saying they did not arrive with 150 years of assumptions about what was and was not inside. And that mattered, because the thing everybody assumed was that the Great Pyramid had been fully mapped. Robbers had been through it. Surveyors had been through it. Napoleon's men had been through it. The floor plan was in every textbook, and the textbooks agreed. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything that follows. The team did not run one experiment. They ran three, with 3 different technologies, in 3 different spots, because they knew that one strange reading would get waved off on site. The first pass used nuclear emulsion film, installed by the Nagoya team inside the Queen's Chamber. Emulsion film runs on chemistry. Muons passing through it leave real physical tracks in the material, the same way light leaves an image on old camera film. And it is slow work. The films have to sit in place for months while the sky does the exposing, then get carried out and developed, then get read by people counting particle tracks under a microscope. The film came back showing an excess of muons arriving from above the Grand Gallery. The second pass used scintillator hodoscopes brought in by a separate Japanese group and set up in the same chamber. A different instrument, a different set of ways to go wrong, and the same result. The third pass used gas detectors built by the French Atomic Energy Commission, and these were not even placed inside. They sat outside the pyramid, looking in from a whole other angle. Same void, same place. 3 technologies, 3 teams, 3 vantage points, and 1 hollow shape that would not go away. Taiyubi's summary was blunt. "A void that big," he said, "cannot be an accident." That was 2017, and the reaction split almost immediately. Some Egyptologists pointed out that the pyramid is full of gaps built for structural reasons. Above the king's chamber sit 5 separate compartments, stacked one on top of the other, and the standard reading is that they exist to take weight off the ceiling below. A void, in that reading, is not a secret, it is engineering. That is a fair argument, and it deserves respect. The builders clearly did use empty space as a tool. The trouble is the shape. Relieving compartments are low, flat, and crude, because they were never meant to be seen. The big void is described as running at least 30 meters with a profile like the Grand Gallery, which is one of the most carefully built spaces in the ancient world. Nobody has explained why a weight relief gap would be shaped like a hall. If that sounds like the strangest part of the story, it isn't. Because while that argument was running, something else was happening on the north face of the pyramid, in a spot millions of tourists had already photographed. Above the original entrance, there is a set of enormous stone beams leaned against each other in a peak. Egyptologists call it the Chevron. 2 pairs of massive rafters, angled like a tent, sitting out in the open, visible from the esplanade where the tour buses park. People have walked past those stones for centuries. They are in old photographs, they are in engravings. Nobody thought they were hiding anything, because the standard explanation was simple enough. Big angled beams push weight out to the sides, protecting whatever sits underneath. So the chevron got explained, and then it got ignored. One man refused to ignore it, and he was not an archaeologist either. Jean-Pierre Houdin is a French architect. In the early 2000s, he walked away from his career to work full-time on a single question, which was how the Great Pyramid was actually built. His answer, worked out over years with engineers, was that the builders used a ramp that spiraled up inside the body of the pyramid instead of one giant ramp outside it. That theory is still argued about, and plenty of experts reject it. But buried inside it was a plain claim that could be checked. Houdin's model required a corridor above the main entrance. In his reconstruction, it was the opening leg of what he called the Noble Circuit, a route running to the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber. He published the model with the Egyptologist Bob Breyer in a Smithsonian Books volume in 2008. So an architect with no shovel and no dig permit drew a passage into a spot where every textbook said there was nothing but solid limestone. Then he waited. It came out of an architect working backward, asking where the builders would have had to put things in order for the building to go up at all. His ramp only worked if that corridor was there, which made the whole model checkable by anyone who could see through stone. Hold on to that sequence, because it is what turns a scan story into something stranger. The drawing came before the measurement. Here is how the second half unfolded, and it took 7 years. The Nagoya team placed muon emulsion films in the descending corridor, the original passage that runs down into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. Those films sat under the chevron area. When they were developed, they showed a void sitting above the corridor. The team named it the Scan Pyramid's North Face Corridor. Then they went at it again with more film to pin down its shape. Between 2019 and 2020, the French Atomic Energy Commission installed its own real-time muon detectors underneath the same target, adding a second read of its own. Between 2020 and 2022, a group from the Technical University of Munich ran radar and ultrasound tests right on the chevron stones themselves. 4 technologies now, all pointed at one patch of masonry above a doorway that every visitor to Giza had walked through. Everything agreed. There was air behind those blocks. On February 24th, 2023, the team presented its results to Egypt's scientific committee, chaired by Zahi Hawass. Then they did something nobody had managed in 4,500 years. Using a high-frequency ground-penetrating radar, they located a gap in the joint behind the lower chevron blocks. Not a hole they made, but a gap the builders themselves had left. Into that gap, they threaded a Japanese endoscope roughly 6 millimeters across, about the width of a pencil, and the camera went in. What came back was a corridor, roughly 9 meters long, about 2.1 meters wide, sitting around 7 meters above the main entrance, walls of rough, unfinished blocks. Overhead, a peaked stone ceiling, the gabled shape that shows up over the most important spaces in the pyramid. It was empty. No objects, no inscriptions, no coffin, just a finished, built space in a zone that every map on Earth had labeled solid rock. That footage is almost certainly the first time human eyes had seen the inside of that corridor since the 4th dynasty. The results came out on March 2nd, 2023, in Nature Communications, with a second paper laying out the location work in the journal NDT and E International. And Jean-Pierre Houdin's 2008 drawing had put a corridor above the entrance in roughly the right place, 15 years earlier. Egypt's antiquities chief at the time, Mostafa Waziri, gave the careful version at the press event in front of the pyramid. "The corridor looks unfinished," he said, "and the gabled ceiling suggests it was built to take weight off something below." Then he said the part that got quoted less. That weight might be sitting over the entrance, or it might be sitting over another chamber or space that has not been found yet. He also added, on the record, that the pharaoh may have had more than one burial chamber. So there is the official explanation, structural and sensible and dull on purpose. And it does not close anything, because the man who said it went straight on to add that the scanning would keep going to work out what lies under the corridor or at the end of it. The people who actually held the camera did not treat this as solved. 9 meters of corridor, with a ceiling built like a temple roof, guarding either a doorway everyone already knew about or something underneath that nobody has ever seen. The evidence has not settled that either way. This is the point where the polite explanations start running out. The scanning did continue, and this is where the story gets quieter and better. In March 2025, a team led by researchers at Portland State University, the Technical University of Munich, and Cairo University published a paper in Scientific Reports doing something plain and important. They fused the images. Radar, ultrasound, and the tomography data had each produced their own picture of the Chevron zone. Individually, each one carries doubt. Combined into one picture, the paper reported a strong air gap sitting behind the Chevron blocks and confirmed the corridor across all 3 methods at once. Then, in November 2025, a second Scientific Reports paper went further and brought in a technique that had never been used inside the Great Pyramid before: electrical resistivity tomography, which works by pushing a small current through stone and measuring how hard the stone pushes back. Solid stone resists one way, and open air resists another. It is standard gear in geology and almost never trusted on tricky monuments because the uneven surfaces make the math brutal. They adapted it anyway, across 3 rounds of fieldwork between 2020 and 2022, working on a chevron surface with barely enough room to lay out the measurement lines. They built a 3-dimensional map of the whole area from a point cloud just to run the calculation properly. It found the corridor. So count them: nuclear emulsion film, scintillator hodoscopes, gas detectors, ground-penetrating radar, ultrasound, image fusion, electrical resistivity, and a camera on a wire. 8 approaches, across multiple countries and multiple decades of instrument design. Every single one says the same thing: the Great Pyramid has spaces inside it that no living person has entered. Now hold that fact close, because in November 2025, the story jumped again. At the 44th Sharjah International Book Fair, Zahi Hawass told an audience that a new discovery inside Khufu's pyramid would be revealed to the world in 2026. He described a passage, roughly 30 meters long, located with scanning technology, and he said it ends at a door, not a wall, a door. Hawass said robots, run by remote control, had been sent in to reach and clean spaces people cannot get to, and that the team had pinned down the exact spot of the passage. What is behind the door, he said, would be released only after the full analysis, with a science report first. He also said, at the same event, that he believes something very important is hidden there. And the timing of that announcement is almost too neat. It landed weeks after the Grand Egyptian Museum opened beside the Giza Plateau, holding more than 5,000 objects from Tutankhamun's tomb, with the eyes of the world already pointed at Egypt. Now, Hawass is a showman, and plenty of people in the field have said so out loud. He has promised big before. Reporters covering the Sharjah session flagged exactly that, noting that a claim this size still needs the hard proof standing behind it. That skepticism is earned, and it belongs in the story. But the claim is not floating in midair. It sits on top of 10 years of published, peer-reviewed work by teams from Japan, France, Germany, the United States, and Egypt, all of whom kept finding emptiness the textbooks said was not there. And it is the same man who ran the Jedi Project, who has spent decades chasing sealed doors in this specific building, and who already knows what it feels like to drill through one and find another one waiting. And there is a machine that could settle a lot of this, which has been sitting on a drawing board for years. In 2017, after the Big Void went public, the Egyptologist Mark Lehner asked a physicist at Fermilab in Illinois whether an American lab could go back and check the finding on its own. That physicist was Alan Bross, who had spent his career on muon imaging, including work on scanning cargo containers. Bross put a team together, and in early 2018, the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities approved the project. They call it Exploring the Great Pyramid. The plan is not another detector in a chamber. It is a pair of muon telescopes so big they have to be built inside shipping containers and parked outside the pyramid, using roughly 1,300 square meters of detector material between them. Their published estimate is upwards of 100 times the sensitivity of the equipment scan pyramids used. At that level of detail, they would not just be mapping holes. Bross has said the system could be detailed enough to tell what an object inside a void is made of, whether it is pottery, metal, stone, or wood. So the ceiling on this is not finding another hole. It is reading the contents of a sealed room from the sand outside the monument, with nothing ever being opened. The catch is the math. Building the telescopes would take 2 to 3 years. Imaging the pyramid at full resolution would take about 3 more, and would mean catching roughly 100 trillion muons. And it needs money. The mission picked up starter funding from Fermilab and the University of Chicago, then hit the money wall that stalled everything during the pandemic years. So the instrument that could tell us what is actually in there exists on paper, cleared by the Egyptian government, and waiting on a budget. There is one more thing worth sitting with here. Khufu built the largest stone structure in human history. It stands 146 meters tall, and it was the tallest thing people made until the Eiffel Tower went up in 1889. His pyramid has been entered, mapped, emptied, and studied for thousands of years. His body has never been found. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber was empty when it was first recorded. No mummy, no treasure, no inscription naming him anywhere inside his own tomb. That is the vacuum every one of these scans falls into. A monument built to hold a king, with no king in it, and now with confirmed rooms inside it that nobody has entered. So we come back to where we started, and it looks different now. That 100-foot space above the Grand Gallery is still sealed, and there is still no route to it. The 9-meter corridor behind the Chevron has been seen through a hole the width of a pencil and nothing more. The blocking stone at the top of the Queen's chamber shaft has a second stone behind it, and the 30-meter passage Hawass describes ends at a door that is still shut. 4,500 years, 8 technologies, 4 generations of researchers, and the number of human beings who have stood inside any of those spaces is still 0. Egypt says the answer is coming. The rest of us are waiting on a report about a door. So what do you think is on the other side of it? An empty gap the builders left to hold up a ceiling? Or a room somebody sealed on purpose and expected to stay sealed? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you want the other tomb nobody is allowed to open, the one where the old texts and the soil tests agree in a way that should worry people, that story is waiting for you next.